Coming up on this episode, instant reaction to the Oklahoma City Thunder officially winning the 2024-25 NBA Championship, and a look at the blockbuster Kevin Durant trade to the Houston Rockets and what it means for the Golden State Warriors, and in particular, young forward Jonathan Kuminga. Welcome back to the Golden State with Mates podcast, recording this just over half an hour after the Oklahoma City Thunder were declared NBA champions with a 103-91 victory over the Indiana Pacers at Paycom Center in Game 7. I'll get onto the game in a second specifically, and of course the devastating injury to Tyrese Haliburton in the first quarter. But I want to start with the Thunder because I think as NBA champions, they deserve to be the biggest discussion point from this and deserve the credit and the recognition for what they've done this season. I went into this game wanting the Pacers to win, and that was probably even more so after the Haliburton injury. I'm not a huge fan of the Thunder and some of their tactics to a degree, but I can absolutely respect how this team has been formed, what Sam Presti has done as general manager, what Mark Daigneault as coach has done. Shea obviously is the MVP this season. How these guys sacrifice and play together, I fully respect it. And I also do not begrudge, and I think this is probably my biggest takeaway from the Thunder winning the championship, is I cannot begrudge the best team all season winning the championship. Like, I, as a fan, I want the regular season to mean something. Like, a lot of people look at it and say, regular season basketball, playoff basketball is completely different. And that once we get to the playoffs, it's a completely different ball game. And in many aspects, we see that. We saw the Warriors as the 7th seed take out a 2nd seed Houston Rockets in the first round of the playoffs because experience comes into these kinds of things. And I get all that, but I want the regular season to mean something. I don't want to watch each team play 82 games in the regular season, then for it to not mean anything and for everything to restart completely. And I think for the best team with perhaps the most consistent player, for them to go through and be the best team all year and then to have it capped off winning the championship, I cannot begrudge that. Like, this was the best team in the league, not just in the West. This was the best team in the league from essentially start to finish, and they fully deserve it. And there's just absolutely no taking away from that. Like, we can talk about the Haliburton injury. We can talk about some of the things that happened in this game that I was disappointed with and took away potentially from the chance that Indiana had of potentially making this a really, really close game or even themselves winning the championship. Like, the Pacers were right there. And I think there is an element of this that's disappointing from a Warrior perspective where you think if Steph doesn't get injured, can we beat the Timberwolves? Can we make things really difficult and potentially beat the Thunder? Could the Warriors be lifting the championship trophy right now? Look, these are all ifs, buts, hypotheticals, and I don't want to go into that too much. And I think at the end of the day, again, I cannot begrudge the best team over the entire season winning the championship. Look, I am I'm a big believer in it, and perhaps more so now, perhaps more now more than ever. Because, as a Collingwood fan in the AFL right now, we're 2/3 of the way through the season and we look like the best team in the league easily. We're a game and a half up on second place on the ladder. But I'm also fully aware that you don't win premierships, you don't win championships or whatever 2/3 of the way through the season. You've got to be there at the pointy end. And I hope and I want to believe that what we are doing now as a team and being on top of the ladder 2/3 of the way through the season will ultimately hold us in good stead and allow us to win a premiership come September. Now, the fact the Thunder have just been able to do that, I don't know, it just gives me a little bit more hope and belief for what Collingwood can do in the next few months. So again, I want to be a believer in what you do throughout the entire year ultimately will pay dividends if you are the most consistent and the best team. And again, I fully respect the Thunder for what they've been able to do in terms of their roster building, completely like the envy of the league that you can win a championship with this young squad, with a MVP who's in the absolute prime of his career and should be for the next 4 to 5 years at least. You got Jalen Williams, you got Chet Holmgren. You've added the right pieces you needed to with out the big Alex Caruso deal last offseason. And even then, I've been a little bit critical, and I think others have been critical of Sam Presti, perhaps not going as far in and utilizing the future draft assets that they've got to perhaps make a bigger win now move. But ultimately, like, he's been proven correct. He's basically been like, I don't have to use these future picks. We're good enough as is. We can win the championship as is. And he's been proven right. And the fact they're set up now for a potential dynasty, like, I don't want to go too early with it because, I mean, the first and second tax apron stuff, like, it can become problematic to keep your players together and therefore build the dynasty that we've seen in decades past. But this team is really, really well set up. And I know we say that after every champion, basically, every year. But I think this is a little bit different when you've got a team this young with this stack of assets to come. It's absolutely the envy of the league. And I wish the Warriors were in this position. Again, I can't complain too much. The Warriors have won 4 titles since 2015. So I'm not going to be the one complaining necessarily. But, man, there's going to be a lot of fan bases around the league who haven't had the success or don't look like they're going to have the future. Look at a team like Phoenix, right? How envious would they be of the Thunder's situation right now after what they've been through? And obviously, dealing Kevin Durant in a pretty disastrous trade that I'll get into here shortly earlier today. So, man, congratulations to the Thunder. Again, perfectly built team and look like they're set up for more dominance over the rest of the decade and potentially beyond. And it makes things incredibly difficult for the Warriors, specifically in the Western Conference, when you've got a team like the Thunder that you have to chase down, a team like the Spurs who are on the come up, a team like the Rockets who just finished as the 2 seed. Now I've added Kevin Durant, one of the best players in the game. So it's going to be a bloodbath next season, but the Thunder have rightly, I think, won this championship, the best team across the course of the entire season. In terms of this game specifically, just a huge dampener put on it. I was eagerly anticipating this game, Game 7 NBA Finals. It's what it's all about. And unfortunately, we got to just over halfway through the first quarter, and Tyrese Haliburton, who'd hit a series of threes to start the game and looked pretty good. As I said, after Game 6, I thought that Hallie looked really good and didn't really look hampered by his calf strain. Like, who knows what kind of jabs, injections, pills he was taking to push through. Like, obviously, it was going to have to be something fairly significant to try and numb the pain or whatever. And he looked pretty good in Game 6, I thought, and he looked really good at the start of Game 7 with a series of threes. And then for him to go down, with what was just a classic torn Achilles mechanism, essentially taking off like that, you could basically see it pop. We've seen it happen with Dame. We've seen it happen with Jason Tatum. We've seen it happen with way too many players, unfortunately, throughout the course of this season. It's just super disappointing. It just puts a dampener on what could have been. And it still was an exciting game. And full credit to the Pacers, man. Like, they battled hard. They did what they do. They fought hard. They never gave up. They led at halftime. And you thought, geez, this could be something pretty special in the works here. But pretty predictably, they just didn't have enough offense. It was TJ McConnell or bust in the third quarter, and they fell behind by 21 early in the fourth. Even then, they didn't give up. They still fought back. Ben Mathurin was pretty decent and kept them afloat a little bit and kept them with some kind of chance in the fourth quarter, but ultimately it wasn't enough. And again, full credit to them, but without Hallie, they were always going to struggle to create offense. And again, full credit to the Thunder for the way they played, particularly defensively. In the second half, they completely put the clamps on, and the Pacers didn't really have enough to respond. And again, without Hallie, that was always going to be the case. So just feel robbed as a neutral NBA fan of what could have been a spectacular, historic Game 7. I think this will go down as a pretty predictable result in the end, especially once Hallie went down. It's just like, I think the Pacers really, really had an opportunity to win this game. I thought they started the game well. Hallie started the game well. Thought they had a real chance, a real shot at what would have been a stunning and memorable Game 7 victory on the road to win a championship. And for him to go down, it's super disappointing, because not only have you been robbed of a potential great Game 7 and a close in the last 2 or 3 minutes where you could have had a one-possession ball game or something like that. Instead of that, well, not only that, but you also have one of the best players in the league and another all-star go down for a full year. and we're going to have to wait and see what the subsequent implications of that are going to be in terms of what do Indy do now? And I think it goes to show you that as sad and terrible as the Haley injury is, it probably proves that the Warriors made the right decision on Steph in not forcing him back from his hamstring injury earlier on. Obviously, Steph was on track to play in Game 6 against Minnie in the second round, and that would have been a quick turnaround as is, less than 2 weeks after he suffered it in Game 1, but not trying to force him back for Game 5 or anything, I think was obviously probably the right decision in the end. I think as Warrior fans, we're probably comfortable in saying we lost that series if it meant we can see Steph play from Game 1 of next season. And unfortunately for Pacer fans, like, they've just lost the NBA Finals, and now it's compounded by the fact that Hallie is most likely, it hasn't been fully confirmed as a torn Achilles yet, but it's been told that it's an Achilles injury, and I think we all kind of know what's happened here. So, for him to be out for the entirety of next season now puts a real dampener on this, but obviously what Indy do now moving forward, who knows? And the Steph stuff, obviously, it would have been a quick turnaround for him to come back in Game 6 anyway, but I think probably the right decision was made for him not to be forced back any earlier than that. Who knows? He might have come back, fought through it, and been fine, and potentially, helped the Warriors to victory and helped them to a series win and helped them to the Western Conference Finals against the Thunder. And maybe Steph might have been right playing through it, but I think the risks are pretty obvious in these kind of scenarios. I had a mate come around to watch Game 6 on Friday or Thursday American time, and I was talking to him before the game, and I asked him, I said, how long do you reckon Hallie's got? And I said, and not to put the mockers on him, not to sound like a terrible person, but I said I could see him tearing his Achilles. Like, this is just classic. I was like this is what happens. Like, Dame did it, kind of returned pretty quickly from his, blood clot thing. Like, if you force things and rush injuries, this is what can happen. We saw it as Warrior fans in 2019 finals, and I'll always respect the crap out of KD for what he did in the 2019 finals, where I think he evidently rushed back from his calf injury to try and help the Warriors out down 3-1 on the road in Toronto, and played a really good 9 minutes, that probably helped the Warriors win that game and force the series into a Game 6, but then went down with a torn Achilles and missed in the entire next season. I always respect KD for that, because I think he put the team and his teammates first in that scenario and over his own potential health and future. Fortunately, he's been able to come back and be a similarly great player than what he was beforehand. And I think that's the great thing about modern medicine and health and physios and stuff like that, is these guys, elite athletes, can now suffer these potentially, previously career devastating injuries, and now can come back and still be great players. So fortunately, hopefully that's still the case and is the case for Tyrese Haliburton, who's still young enough to come back from this and be a multiple-time All-Star and be the player we've seen him be throughout this season, throughout the playoffs, where he's had one of the biggest clutch seasons we've ever seen in the NBA. So just really, really disappointed for him, sad for him, and I think fortunate that we as Warrior fans can go into next season knowing that Steph is going to be healthy, he's going to be ready to go, he's going to have a full training camp, and he's going to be ready from Game 1. And so we'll wait and see what happens with Hallie here over the next couple of days, whether it's confirmed that it's a torn Achilles, but I'm assuming that it will be the case. And again, I don't think it's an overly surprise. I said going into Game 6 to my mate that this is a potential for happening. And, I think if you asked him, would you sacrifice your Achilles for your team winning the championship? He probably would have said yes. I don't know. Winning an NBA championship is what it's all about. And I think if you asked him, he probably would have said, yep, it's worth the sacrifice. But unfortunately, his team didn't go on to win, and now he's left out for a year on top of losing the NBA Finals. It's so tough. And I think if the Warriors were in the NBA Finals when Steph did his hamstring, then sure, he probably would have tried to battle through it. I think it's probably a bit different being in the second round of the playoffs compared to the NBA Finals. So this is not me having a go at Hallie or having a go at the Pacers medical staff for him forcing through this injury. I completely understand it. This is a once in a lifetime potentially opportunity. Like, will the Pacers be back in the NBA finals in the next 10 years? Maybe, like they might be, but it's not a guarantee. And so you have this once in a potential lifetime opportunity to win a championship. And I can completely understand why he thought, I've got a calf strain, but I want to play through it. I want to force through it for my team, for my teammates, and try to get this thing done. And so, again, it's such a tough predicament to be in, because the upside is you play through it and you win a title. The downside is this: you lose the finals, and now you've got a torn Achilles that you're going to have to deal with for the next 12 months. It's incredibly disappointing. In terms of the game itself, just a few things I wanted to point to. I was really, really disappointed with some of the officiating late in the second quarter, early third quarter, which I thought completely changed the momentum of the game when the Pacers really had an opportunity. They were fighting hard. They were scrapping. They had a 1-point lead at halftime. And just a few things went against them, which I thought, okay, you can't have anything go against them in this situation when they're without Tyrese Haliburton. Like, they have to have everything go right. They can't have any officiating going against them. And I just thought there was in really disappointing fashion. The one at the end of the first half when I think Lou Dort just deliberately put himself in the path of Benedict Mathurin and flopped, and they called an offensive foul. That was just horrific to me. Like, there was one earlier in the half as well where I think Kayson Wallace got a steal on TJ McConnell when he was just holding his arm while he was dribbling. Like, a couple of those calls there in the first half were poor. And then early in the third quarter, there was a play where I think Shea was trying to post up, and then it looked like he just palmed the ball, like carried the ball, like one of those old Jordan Poole kind of ones where the NBA for a period started calling pretty prolific. I can't speak. Pretty frequently, let's say pretty frequently. And it just didn't call that one. And I think Lou Dort hit a top of the key 3 out of it. So that was a bit disappointing. And then like the next possession or a possession later, you had Jalen Williams basically just tap the ball to himself and make a layup. And that was a clear carry or travel as well. So I don't know, maybe I'm looking at this from an Indiana bias perspective because I wanted them to win, but I just thought, okay, everything's going to have to go right for them to win, and they can't have any officiating stuff go against them. And I just thought that there's a few plays either side of the halftime break that I was like, this is just turning the momentum, giving the Thunder all the advantage, and I just thought it was disappointing, and again, took away from what could have been potentially a really tight finish at the end of the game. But again, I'm not trying to take too much away from the Thunder, who, as I said before, best team all season, deserve the championship. So congratulations to them. Let's get on to the Kevin Durant trade, which I was 6 hours late to earlier today because I think it happened about 2:30 my time, 2:30 a.m., and I got up at 8:30 a.m. So a few messages from people, all different stuff, asking my thoughts on the trade and knowing that I wouldn't be awake for it. So that was a bit disappointing, but it's not the first time. I remember going back 2 years ago now when the Warriors traded Jordan Poole for Chris Paul. Obviously, I was late to that one by 4 or 5 hours. So unfortunately, living in Australia with the time zone stuff, these things can happen. But my initial thoughts reading the trade and the details of it were that Houston have absolutely fleeced Phoenix. And not surprisingly, but I still think disappointingly, particularly as a fan of the Warriors, who now have to see Houston, who are an up-and-coming, already somewhat arrived young team in the West, given they finished second in the standings this season. Like, to see them basically add one of the league's still very great players while retaining their flexibility to either make more moves or just like to preserve their future and not have to sacrifice much of their future at all. Like, it's just disappointing. And I think it makes things a lot harder for the Warriors. And so to give up Jalen Green, obviously Dylan Brooks, the number 10 pick, 5 second-round picks for Kevin Durant. The KD stuff, I think people have got a little bit low on KD and think like, oh, this is, he's going to be 37 years old to start next season, and that, since he's left the Warriors, he just hasn't had any success. Well, like, I just think I think people have got too low on him. I think people have to remember this is one of the league's great all-time scorers, one of the league's all-time great players, a guy that still last season averaged nearly 27 points a game on ridiculous, what was it, like 53, 43, 84 shooting splits. Like, he's still a great player. And when you look at the trade package that the Rockets have given up here, it's just an absolute steal. Like, it is an absolute steal to me. And if you look at the situations that KD has been in, and he's certainly played a role in some of the disappointment, obviously, that's happened at Brooklyn and in Phoenix since he left the Warriors. But to me, like, in Brooklyn, he was at a pretty dysfunctional team where you had all the Kyrie stuff going on that was a real nuisance, I think, on and off the court. The whole James Harden thing was a bit of a disaster. You then go to Phoenix, where they basically immediately make a disastrous Bradley Beal trade, pretty dysfunctional front office, completely revamping their coaching staff basically year after year, bringing in head coach after head coach. What they're going to be now in their fourth head coach in 4 seasons. Like, it's tough. It's tough to be successful and be where you want to be when you don't have that certainty within the organization, and when players and the front office and the coaches are just so uncertain on where their role sits. And I just think KD has been a couple of pretty tough situations, which, again, he's played a role in. He could be better. And I think this, in terms of a leadership factor to this, which I think has always been the question on KD, can he be the number one leader of a team in terms of the chemistry, in terms of the culture within the locker room? And I think that's why maybe he had success at the Warriors, because he didn't necessarily need to do those things, because you had a Steph Curry, because you had a Steve Kerr, because you had an Andre Iguodala or a Draymond Green. Like, KD could just go out there and hoop. And I think Brooklyn, he had to try and set a culture. Phoenix, he had to try and come in and set a culture, particularly after they lost kind of a strong presence in Chris Paul and decided to trade him for Bradley Beal. I think that's not necessarily his go. He just wants to ball. And I think in Houston, he's going to get that opportunity now. Ime Udoka, a very strong presence as head coach. You've got an experienced guy like a Fred VanVleet there as well. Who knows, they might end up moving him, but I'm pretty confident he'll probably remain on the team. So I just think that KD's now back in a situation where he can come into this Houston team and be additive, rather than necessarily having to come in and be the savior necessarily. Like, this is a team that just finished second in the Western Conference. Like, he's additive, as he was to the Warriors, right? The Warriors were a 73-9 win team, losing Game 7 in the NBA Finals. KD comes in, he's additive to an already great team. And I think he can come in and be additive to an already excellent Houston team. As Phoenix, you could say, you could argue Phoenix were already really good, obviously, and probably better before they got KD than what they were after. But they gave up so much in the KD trade that they kind of revamped their team way too much, and they revamped even more so when they traded Chris Paul for Bradley Beal. So I don't know. I feel nervous now as a Warrior fan about how good Houston could be, because they're clearly their number one issue throughout the regular season, and obviously in the first round against the Warriors, was just their absolute lack of scoring power and their shot creation and their shot making. And KD now gives them that and fills that void, and at a price that is way too cheap. But ultimately, like, Phoenix put themselves in this position, and I think it goes to show you just how far player empowerment has probably gone in the league, where this kind of deal is not surprising to me, but I think we just got conditioned to it as NBA fans. Is like, this is what the price is going to be for KD, when in reality, it's like, no, this should not be the price for Kevin freaking Durant. He's so much better than what this price would suggest. And so it's disappointing, but it is what it is. Once Phoenix didn't find a deal for KD mid-season, this was always going to be the case. Once he found out that they were trying to move him, he obviously wasn't happy about it. He's got 1 year left on his contract, so he was always going to be able to dictate where he wanted to go. And he said, I want to go to Miami, I want to go to San Antonio, I want to go to Houston, one of those 3 teams. And at that point, like, those teams had all the leverage. They weren't going to put forward, like, Miami didn't want to put forward Kalel Ware, who was a mid-first round pick 12 months ago. Like, even you look at Toronto, didn't want to give up Jakob Poeltl in a trade for Kevin Durant. It's like, what are we doing, really? Right? San Antonio didn't want to go all in on Kevin Durant. Houston wanted Kevin Durant, but only at their price, and that's ultimately what they've given up. And so it's a fantastic deal for Houston. But I do wonder whether or not Phoenix should have said stuff player empowerment. Let's try and make a Kevin Durant trade mid-season when a team like the Warriors are incredibly desperate. Like Golden State were desperate. They would have put legitimate assets on the table where maybe like Wiggins and Kuminga go to the Heat, where Butler goes to the Suns, and the Suns get a bounty of picks on top of that as well. And therefore, they have some future draft assets, but they also have a star player who could potentially help them in the short term to try and preserve some of their draft capital and ensure they're not giving up top 5, top 10 picks in the near future. So I don't know. I think if I was Phoenix, I would be regretting not trading KD mid-season, even though he made it clear that he didn't want that to happen. Try and find a deal anyway. Right, try and send him to the Warriors and get together with the Warriors and say stuff what this guy thinks. Let's make the trade anyway, right? Along with Miami in that 3. And I know, it's not necessarily the Suns in this situation. It's the Warriors who would have backed out of the KD business knowing he didn't want to be there. But I just think Phoenix should have tried, and in the aftermath of this, would probably look back at it and think, yeah, we just should have tried to make a deal mid-season where some of these teams were desperate and would have given up way more value than what Houston have ultimately given up now. So I don't know. We'll wait and see what happens, starting next season. But I'm pretty scared about what the Rockets could look like, having already taken the jump to the 2nd seed in the West this season that's just been completed. In terms of how this implicates the Warriors more so than, or how this impacts the Warriors more so than just obviously Houston getting, I think, significantly better and Phoenix probably getting a little bit worse. Could it get much worse for Phoenix? I don't know. Like giving up Kevin Durant, yes, there was obvious dysfunction there last season, but that's still a great player to give up. And Jalen Green, we know the issues with him, and he was exposed somewhat by the Warriors, obviously, during the first round of the playoffs. I think Dylan Brooks might actually be helpful for them, particularly, again, from a leadership, like locker room standpoint, if he does remain with the team, and we'll see what they can do with the number 10 pick, but that's still not ideal when it seems like there's a general consensus that the draft is about 8 picks, the top 8 picks, and then there's a bit of a drop-off after that. So we'll see what happens with Phoenix and Houston, but beyond that, obviously, in terms of impacting the Warriors as 2 Western Conference teams, I think the biggest thing right now will be the future of Jonathan Kuminga, who Miami has been reported as a potential destination for JK if they didn't land KD. Now that's obviously, KD's gone to Houston. He's not in Miami. So does the Heat now, or do the Heat now turn their attention to Jonathan Kuminga? I think that's a strong possibility. What does that mean for the Warriors in terms of what they could get back in a potential sign and trade? Does Andrew Wiggins all of a sudden become a potential target again? We know he probably would have been on the way to Phoenix had Miami executed a deal there for KD. So the Andrew Wiggins stuff, I've spoken about it before. Would you be willing to give up, say, JK and Moses Moody to bring Andrew Wiggins back to the Bay? I think that's a deal that right now I probably wouldn't do. I think I'd prefer to just try and get the upside of JK and try and lean into that a little bit more, as well as Moody, who, obviously became a pretty good 3-and-D player over the last few months of the season. And then the playoffs were obviously a bit of a disaster, but, there's still, it's a team-friendly contract. I think there's still some optimism that Moses can be a fairly reliable, capable 3-and-D option for the Warriors if he was to remain. Obviously, there's going to be other potential trades in the works that may include Moses Moody, potentially separate to Jonathan Kuminga. But right now, I think obviously the KD stuff certainly impacts the Warriors in terms of JK and what may happen there, and whether or not Miami have interest, and whether or not we could see a potential sign and trade where, Andrew Wiggins is back with the Warriors. It's hard to see too many other players on the Heat roster, I think, that the Warriors would have interest in. Of course, the Warriors are going to have the leverage here to say, well, you can't sign this guy outright. Like, it needs to be a trade. We want to see fair value in return. So beyond Wiggs, I'm not sure who that Heat player is. Like, obviously, the Warriors are not going to have interest in Terry Rozier. They're not going to be willing to give up. Miami are not going to be willing to give up Bam Adebayo or Tyler Hero. You wouldn't have thought. So I don't know. We'll wait and see what happens here. But I think JK and his future is certainly now an even bigger watch than what it already was after the KD trade. The other one from a Phoenix standpoint that I think the Warriors should keep an eye on is what happens with Bradley Beal and his future in the Valley. It's been heavily reported, obviously, that Phoenix don't really want Bradley Beal moving forward. And John Gambadaro of Arizona Sports Network has been pretty heavy on the fact that the Suns will either trade Beal or even the potential of buying him out this offseason. That there's a 0% chance that he's back with the Suns next season. He reiterated that on the Kevin O'Connor show earlier today in the wake of the KD trade. Beal is an interesting one to me because if he is bought out, obviously the Warriors are going to not have any interest as a trade, right? That's, in fact, no. You'd be surprised if any team whatsoever has interest in Bradley Beal as a trade candidate, making $110 million over the last 2 years of his contract. But if he is bought out, then suddenly he becomes a lot more palatable and going to be a strong target for teams in free agency. Like, this is a guy, yes, huge downsides. Yes, has been a disaster. His reputation has gone in the bin over the last 18, 24 months. But again, when you're on a $50+ million contract, the expectations are a bit different to if you're making 10, 15 million, perhaps less than that. And that's what could happen with Bradley Beal. This is a guy, again, averaged 17 points a game last season, pretty good shooting efficiency, close to 50% from the floor, 37% from three-point range. Has, had 12 games this season with more than 25 points. Like, that's a legit scorer, shot creator that the Warriors lack on this roster beyond Steph and Jimmy. And so if Bradley Beal is bought out by the Phoenix Suns, becomes a free agent, the Warriors would not be doing their due diligence if they didn't express interest in Bradley Beal. Now, whether they can actually do it or not remains to be seen. It's going to be dependent on what happens with Jonathan Kuminga. It's going to be dependent on what else happens via potential trade or free agency. We know that if you are above the first tax apron, you cannot sign guys that are bought out who previously made more than the non-taxpayer mid-level exception, which clearly Bradley Beal makes a lot more than that. So teams above the first apron wouldn't even be able to have a chance of getting Beal because that is flat out illegal. And then, of course, if you're under that apron, then what does Beal actually accept? Does he still want to make as much money as possible and potentially try and get that non-taxpayer mid-level exception around $12, $13 million? Would he be willing to take a vet minimum or the taxpayer mid-level at $5.7 million? That's all going to be a wait and see. So there's still plenty of obstacles and hurdles to face here before the Warriors even have a potential shot at Bradley Beal. But it's certainly something to keep monitoring as the potential next domino to fall in Phoenix, with reports that they certainly do not want him on the roster next season and will do everything possible, whether that's via trade or what would be a pretty historic buyout, given he makes $110 million on the last 2 years of his contract. We'll wait and see what happens there, but the Warriors should certainly have interest in Bradley Beal if he does become available. Just the last thing to finish off here. Former Warrior Dario Saric opted into his $5.4 million player option with the Denver Nuggets today as well. That kind of got lost a little bit, as you'd expect, with Game 7 of the finals and with the KD trade. But, man, what a disaster for the Denver Nuggets. Still, going back nearly 12 months ago now, why they gave Dario Saric a 2-year, $10.6 million deal. This was a guy that was on a minimum contract with the Warriors who started off the season pretty strongly, but then basically became unplayable over the last month, 6 weeks of the season. He was on a minimum contract. Denver, now ex-GM Calvin Booth, thought it was a good idea after seeing him basically be unplayable for the Warriors. He thought, yeah, let's not just give him more than the minimum. Let's give him 2 years. Let's give him 2 years, $10.6 million. What they were thinking, I don't know. I was heavily critical of the signing at the time. I was like, what are they doing? What have they seen here that no one else has seen? Like, it's ridiculous. And now it's looked even worse since, because he played just 210 minutes and 16 total games for the Nuggets this season. And of course he's going to opt into his player option. Of course, he's not going to get anything more elsewhere. In fact, if he wasn't contracted, If he flat out wasn't contracted or didn't have this player option, then I think there's a big chance that he would have been off to Europe and his NBA career might have been over because he would have got stronger offers elsewhere. And I don't even know who would have given him an offer in the NBA. So I suppose the only hope now for Denver is that with a new coach in David Adelman, a full training camp, off-season, to try and implement his strategies, rotations, whatever else, that maybe Dario Saric can have some kind of resurgence here. But, man, I just want to talk about that briefly because that is a disaster for Denver. It takes them over the first tax apron, so it obviously brings with it all the roster building restrictions. It's just like when you're trying to build a championship and in today's age of first and second tax aprons in the CBA, like you have to make every dollar count. And they just gave Dario Saric $10.6 million to do absolutely nothing. To do flat, you might as well have given me that money. I would have provided the same level of impact as Dario Saric. Me, you guys watching on, $10.6 million to sit there as a bench warmer. Like, it's very difficult to win a championship like, with making a mistake like that. Like, can you imagine the Denver Nuggets right now could be NBA champions if they had got some kind of genuine rotation piece, helpful rotation piece, instead of Dario Saric. Like, who knows? They could have taken the Thunder out in 7 games. Like, they were right there with the Thunder, a close 7-game series with Dario Saric being a complete, like, he did not see the floor whatsoever. Not 1 second, right? Imagine if they'd actually used that money to get a genuine guy who could play 15, 20 minutes a game. Maybe the result of that series is different. Maybe we're sitting here right now and the Denver Nuggets are NBA champions. I don't know, but man, like, what an absolute disaster. Like, I'm not trying to disparage Dario, but man, that is a shocker. An absolute all-time GM shocker. It goes under the radar a little bit because, we're only talking about a guy making less than $6 million, but still, again, today's day and age, you've got to make use of every roster spot and every dollar you have available, and the Nuggets have had an absolute, complete, utter nightmare right there. I'm going to finish it up there, guys. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel already, that would be greatly appreciated. I'm sure now with the NBA season now officially over, much more attention and focus will now be centered on the offseason, so we should have plenty of reports, news, information coming through on the Warriors in the next few days here in the lead up to the draft, obviously turning around straight away. The draft starts on Wednesday. And then, of course, we'll get into free agency shortly after that as well. So thoroughly looking forward to seeing what the Warriors might do. I'll have it all covered here and, of course, across on bluemanhoop.com where you can check out my writing as well if you haven't. Followed me on Twitter at POK252. That's POK252. Thanks for the ongoing support. Thanks to those of you that are listening via the podcast feed, and I'll see you on the next episode.